Okay, I'm going to sharpen a bandsaw for a sawmill with a grinder. And many of the videos I found on YouTube don't actually explain what's happening. They're just demonstrating their fancy machine that, you know, grinds it automatically. But you can do it with a hand grinder, electric hand grinder, or battery operated hand grinder, if you just use the right motion. And if you want to come, I'll show you a close-up of what actually happens. It's sort of confusing as to why it works, but there is no knife edge. All this is a flat edge with a tip, and a flat edge with a pointy tip. And so there's no real angle there in the ground edge at all. It's perpendicular to the flat face. And so with the grinder, what we'll be doing is we'll be coming in on the back edge of the wave-like structure here, down into what they call the gullet, and back up to the point. And then we simply go back down and back up. Now you see here, when I'm bringing the grinder in, the entry point, I actually use the back face of the grinder to grind the back of the wave here, or the front. I guess that'll be the front of a wave. It looks like a wave. So it comes in, can you see that? It comes in across that and then moves along, comes up, and then simply starts back down in again. So that's all it is, and you do that and mark your bandsaw with paint or something so you know where you started. Okay, I've sharpened the blade as you saw, and it wasn't perfect. In fact, I've got to perfect the technique a little. Sometimes as I came in on the straight dip, as it would take the corner, it would eat a little bit too far in. You got to watch that. You got to touch that corner lightly as you come back out of the top of the wave. And so I wasn't getting a perfect grind all the way along. But nevertheless, it seems to cut just like a brand new blade. It's not that critical. But I do want to get rid of that dip in the blade. So I cut and squared it up a little bit more. I've made 2 cuts already with the resharpened blade. But what I'm going to do now is I turn this face up because I cut that while the blade was still blunt. And whenever you saw a seasoned hardwood log and you come to an area of compacted wood, like around a knot where a branch was, traditionally or habitually the blade will turn up or down, generally down, and you'll get a bit of a dip there where it's denser wood. Because the blade is blunt and it's struggling and you're using pressure, it'll tend to dip, and you get a little bit of a dip in your face. And so if I were to turn this sideways and cut boards, I would have boards that would not line up perfectly. So I'm going to make another cut with the sharpened blade, using very little pressure to make sure I get a nice flat face, and then I'll turn this face over to the side again, which will be the edge of my boards. This is for flooring, hardwood flooring, so I want my boards to hug together pretty close. I'm using a Turner handsaw mill made by a guy up north, east United States, and his phone number is 607-843-7318. We can get you a picture of that in a minute, but it's a pretty good bandsaw, a little bit more bang for your buck over the big companies. He just makes them himself. A bigger engine for the price. And a little heavier duty frame, I think, too. So I'm getting ready to line this up and cut another board off of this. And these boards, of course, still have some outer dead wood, so I'll be using these as secondary boards. I'm going to cut about 3/4 of an inch off. So you can see right here, if you take a look, you want to get a close-up on this. With the old blade, when we came to this area where there was compacted wood or denser wood, we got a little bit of a dip. And I was going even slower than I was going that time. Because the blade was blunt, I was having to use a lot more pushing power to get through it. You ideally don't want to have to push very hard. You need to go at the rate the blade can take. But because it was blunt, it still dipped down here. And when I cut back through with the sharpened blade, it pretty well takes that out. You notice there it's a nice straight line now. Whereas here we had a little bit of a dip, and sometimes it gets pretty severe. That's not a very bad one. So now I got a nice flat face. I can turn it sideways, and this will be the edge of my floorboards. And this one will be good for something secondary. Normally you would flip the blade against the feet that hold it on, or the bars that hold it on at the edge here. Normally you would flip it the opposite way, but since I want a certain face up, it's quicker just for me to do it this way and slide it back in place. So you have to decide how exactly you want to cut. Sometimes you might have a nice grain on the other side, and this is a nice grain, but I'm choosing to do it this way. You want to get it nice and firm against that. So it's more important for me to have a good seam between the boards. These logs are about 2 years old. The outer wood was pretty rotted, but you can get away with that with a thick log. I had much thicker logs than this on here. I had logs about this size on here. Actually, the full size of the log was about this tall and this big. When you cut them down to square, I had probably big beams that were over a foot wide and a foot tall this way. This is a smaller one left over, but these sat for about 2 years, even with the bark on. Some of them I wasn't able to get the bark off, and you cut a few inches off the outside and you still have good wood. So when you're busy, you don't always have the ideal situation. So here's our board after hand sharpening. It's about the same as a brand new blade. I don't know how many sharpenings I'll get. I've heard 5 or 6 maybe, and it saves a lot of money because they're expensive. I think about $20 or something like that. You notice here we have a crack that probably runs down the heart of the wood, and so if you have one that runs straight this way, it's better to flip your log up one turn and have your crack running this way, because as you're cutting your boards you may be able to eliminate it in one board, whereas if you leave it perpendicular to your cut, then you may have a crack down every one of your boards. So it's better to cut it out in 1 or 2 cuts when it's horizontal than to have the crack vertical. And so I may end up, because of that, flipping this board. I still have it in 2 or 3 boards instead of all of them, but I'll still have to flip it over one. I had a whole stack of seasoned oak logs sitting here for quite some time. The logs are about this big around, and had people that had run band saws, or not band saws, but regular sawmills, come up and look at it and say, that'll never cut those logs. And the thing they forget is that with a bandsaw, you have a much thinner cut, and the machine has to do a lot less work. So it was able to cut those logs. We've got tons of lumber in the house from it, and they were bigger than this log here, and some of them were 16 feet long, seasoned hardwood. But without sharpening, learning how to sharpen the blade, it would be very expensive, because it does one big 16-foot log, about 2 foot thick, will dull that hardwood blade. It'll still be good for cutting softwood, but I found you'd be breaking your neck trying to cut the next log. So the hand sharpening really makes a difference. I was able to, I think we had about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 8 hardwood logs here total, and we're just finishing up. The rest are softwood except for one. So good old boys don't always tell you the right thing. They only speak from the range of experience that they have. So you want to consult maybe somebody who really knows what they're talking about when considering what this can and can't do, what a bandsaw can and can't do. They can actually do a lot more than people give them credit for. This is only a 13 horsepower engine, but with a little blade that cuts such a thin sliver, it can actually cut quite a bit of hardwood.